thing that I thought was, how much can I possibly talk about benchmarking in a market that is relatively immature? Now, we happen to run a benchmarking product that covers 12 different regions and looks at rates for IT and BPO across those 12 different regions. So it's not like I didn't have data. But I said, how is that going to be interesting, and what is it that people really want to know? And what I've figured out is what people really want to know is, how much is this really going to cost me? At the end of the day, our industry talks a lot about transformation and business outcomes, and those are great things. I believe that is the next frontier for our industry. But the table stakes, we're not going to get anywhere, nearshore, offshore, onshore, wherever, unless there is a compelling reason to do it that can be expressed in dollars and cents or euros. So here's the research that we've done, and here's what that reveals. On average, if you look across all the activity in Latin America and all of the activity that we see in the more traditional offshore locations like Manila, like India, Latin America has an 8% higher TCO, and those numbers are coming closer. Now, 8%, if you think of those are the tangible costs. Those are the things that we can go after and actually measure. There's a lot of things that are much more difficult to measure, and when you begin to look at it that way, what it suggests to us is that there are the advantages, the intangible advantages of Latin America will probably erase that 8%, if not already, in a very short amount of time. So the cost issue is one that we can almost take off the table. There are many other issues: scale, availability of talent, personal and business security, business continuity. All of those are legitimate questions for us to be asking of any market, any country we choose to do business in. So, but I think we are at the stage, and perhaps the reason why there's so many of you in this room is that we've reached the stage where the nearshore question is really not much of a cost question anymore. So here are some of the trends that our company observes. Buyers are getting a much, much better understanding of TCO. That is what has made the push, and I absolutely, I have been evangelizing Nearshore now for almost 15 years. I'm a huge believer in the benefits. And what has changed in the last, frankly, 24 months or less, is that buyers are actually understanding total cost of ownership as opposed to rates. And when that happens, they realize that the differences, as I said, are very, very minimal. There is downward rate pressure on new contracts. It's a very, very, very competitive industry. Those of you who are on the sell side know this already. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. However, the provider industry is making it up on renewals because it's also a very sticky industry. Once somebody has knowledge of your processes or your systems, of your culture, and they've been doing it for 2-3 years, it's very, very difficult to swap them out. Even to bring it back in-house is very, very difficult. So what we're seeing is that actual rates across the industry, offshore, nearshore, wherever, are staying pretty level because although new contracts are cheaper, providers have a tremendous amount of leverage on the renewals, and then those rates crawl up at that point. But right now, I think the industry has reached a point of maturity where outcome-based pricing has gained a lot of strength. And that is a particularly strong suit for the Latin American providers and the providers that are doing business in Latin America. For a number of reasons, which we can get into on the panel, it seems to us easier to reach an outcomes-based agreement for the types of services that are best suited to nearshore. And also, you're overcoming less of a cultural resistance because it is a newer segment of the industry. Contract length getting shorter, that's not exactly a pricing trend, but when you consider the fact that the downward and upward rate pressure happens primarily at contract renewal, it does have a very big impact on pricing. We are seeing almost all new contracts, whether they're BPO or IT, even infrastructure, which is sort of the sacred cow of the 7-year deals, are going down to 3 with automated 1-year renewal terms. So 3 is the new 7. Nearshore is hot. That's why all of you are here. The level of inquiries that we get at my firm about Nearshore has multiplied in the 2 years that we've been in existence. Every month we get more and more and more inquiries. But domestic is getting hotter. I'm getting inquiries about, well, how about a call center in South Dakota? And what about these incentives in Michigan? And we have plant closings in these cities, do you think that that's a viable market of talent for us, of educated people to take on this process or that process or this type of IT? So I think that we're kind of at a crossroads here, and I don't favor one or the other. Every business is going to have a specific need, and every business is going to address it a specific way. But what has happened, and President Uribe talked about the importance of free markets earlier today. Couldn't agree more. Is that free markets are driving kind of cost parity. So now your questions are really about where is the talent, where can I achieve my outcomes the best? And sometimes that answer is going to be around the corner, and sometimes that answer is going to be around the globe, and sometimes it's going to be somewhere in between. I won't take up too much time, but pricing parity with India or close enough where it's almost negligible. We're seeing that out of 3 countries right now: Argentina, Nicaragua, and Mexico, depending on the process and the type of work that's being done. And the highest potential, Brazil, obviously, with the largest population, the most mature business environment, the largest IT segment in the region, has a tremendous amount of potential. Also has a wealth of incredibly bright, creative, talented people. I used to run a center in Porto Alegre, and my story there was, if I want something really, really challenging done that none of my other centers can do, I send it to Porto Alegre. I just can't expect them to follow any standards. And those are trade-offs you make in IT, right? Sometimes you want the creative new stuff, and that's a good thing to know if you are a person who has to make decisions about where you send certain type of work. If you need high degrees of compliance, probably not the place I would think of first. But if you need high degrees of competitiveness and creativity to create something that's new and original, that actually is probably the first place, at least in my experience, that I would go. But Brazil needs to fundamentally change its import and export of services policy, and specifically fiscal policy. It will not grow to its full potential until it can do that. President Uribe mentioned Peru several times. A very positive story developing there. I think it could be the next Colombia, and we've all talked about Colombia quite a bit today. Benchmarking, because of its nature, because you want to grab not just one comparator, but multiple comparators, almost will never get at the total cost. And that's one of the things that you have to accept if you're using benchmarking as a tool. Now remember, I sell this stuff, so I'm telling you all the stuff that you have to ask, but if you're using benchmarking, it's almost never going to get it. It's not a good predictor or indicator of TCO. It is a tool in understanding your TCO or your potential TCO. Talked about when benchmarking is involved. And it's valuable information, but it never tells the whole story. So here's the bottom line. When you're benchmarking Nearshore or anything else, it should be the beginning of a conversation. It should be why you ask questions, not the answer to your questions. So if we're different, if we have a different pricing between Mexico and India, why? And what are we getting for the higher or the lower cost? And what are the exact difference? And if we're evaluating Mexico or Colombia or Costa Rica or Colombia or whatever you're evaluating, the benchmarking can be a very thoughtful, very provocative conversation starter, but if you use it as the scientific end-all, I guarantee you will not only make the wrong decision, but also, unless you happen to own your company and be the CEO, someone will eventually prove you wrong. I have gone over my own time. I want to introduce the gentlemen that are here with me, and we're going to talk a little bit more and take your questions about these topics or anything that comes to your mind. My good friend and colleague Robert McNeil is going to be moderating. He works for HfS Research as well. He does some really, really interesting research on IT and business platforms. And Mark Peacock is the CIO of Pegasus, and he has a wealth of expertise. He's been, like me, an advisor. He's been a consultant. He's a CIO now, and he's been a provider. So he understands this industry from pretty much any side you want to ask the question. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Robert and/or audience questions.
Thank you, Esteban. What I wanted to do is really just kick it off and introduce Mark. Mark is a CIO of Pegasus. Could you really just run through your experience working in Latin America, and specifically how you utilize Latin American resources today in your role?
Absolutely. As Esteban said, we at Pegasus Solutions, we're a travel technology company. We're sort of on the buy side and on the sell side. So we provide a lot of BPO services for hotels. So we're primarily, when I say travel, primarily around hospitality. And so on the cell side, we will provide reservation service, voice services. So inbound, I want to book a hotel. Or indeed, after hours at a hotel, calls will get routed rather than ringing at the front desk. Will get routed to our call centers. So from that side, we sell those services. So kind of sell BPO services. But on the same side, we have our own call centers, but also we buy call center services also off of third parties. So we have kind of an interesting view of both sides of that. And so the interesting piece for this discussion is our own center. One of our own centers is in Sao Paulo, and we've had that center for many years, and actually as well as centers in Madrid and Singapore. Where we buy services is actually domestically in the U.S. So through a third party, we have centers in Kentucky and North Dakota. So it provides us, I think, an interesting comparison point, both captive as well as third party, and nearshore as well as onshore.
That's great. So one of the topics, I guess points that Esteban was making was, don't look essentially at purely rates. Look at TCO.
Right.
Talk to us about what the real TCO is. With your and how you would get to that.
I think Esteban made a great point that if all you're doing is looking at rates, for the most part, Latin America is not going to be the lowest rate. But when you really truly think about TCO and you really sort of peel it back and start thinking about cost of complexity and the cost of complexity in your operations, and the cost to coordinate, to actually reach out and train people and deal with people, there is a kind of a hidden cost, I believe, in going fully offshore. So going to Manila or going to India or going to China, or the flip side of that is that staying in time zone. There are a significant amount. It takes complexity, and so takes sort of implicit cost out of your operation, and then add to that the ability to quickly get to a place.
It's really valuable to be in a similar time zone. When something goes really wrong, you want to be able to phone the team and not the night call help desk. The question was, can we talk about benchmarking captives versus other alternatives?
Yeah, actually there's something to be said, or there's a lot to be said for benchmarking captives, and usually if you're in an industry that likes to share with each other, or if you're in different industries, that's a very good way to learn a lot about, again, not just rates, but how processes execute. We've done a number of, over my career, we've done a number of tours where we go and visit, a pharmaceutical captive in Colombia, then another one in Costa Rica, then another one in Argentina, then another one in Brazil, and sort of, and all members, so the delegation would include members of all of those. It's kind of an informal benchmark. Doesn't necessarily produce data, but it's a journey that teaches those executives that go with you a lot. So I'm a big fan of that. And then benchmarking one versus the other. Again, it's difficult to compare apples and oranges, but you're going to have the retention issue is a very interesting one. In some places, the retention is much higher with the provider. In some cases, the retention is much higher with the captive. And when you go and look at, when I said you started the conversation there is, okay, our rates are different, our cost is different. Could it be that that's retention driven, and is that because we have a better brand than the captive, or because the captive has a better brand than us if we're a provider? So as a nearshore provider, if I were a nearshore provider, the story I would tell every prospect and every customer would be the following. Nearshore, this is a knowledge industry. You want people that are smart and knowledgeable at what they do. The nearshore industry has much, much higher revenue per employee than the offshore industry. Why? Because the employees make more. So if you are a buyer and you're spending $100, how much of that 100 would you prefer go to the employee versus margin, telecommunications, infrastructure? All that? That's the way to really think about it, and it also gets at some of the fundamental TCO issues. I'd rather have $60 of every 100 that I spend go to the people that are ultimately making my business tick than $30. To me, it's a pretty basic equation. And so if I can pay the same, but have a lot more of the money routed to the individual, I think that's a winning proposition. That's the elusive win-win in our industry. I'll let the other ones take a shot at your question. But.
I think some of it goes to this idea about sort of outcome based, and for us, at least the services that we're selling, which are basically sales. So it's very outcome based. Metrics are very easy. It's all about conversion rate, and so I mean, the math on that around cost and conversion, I mean, you can do it with a 4-function calculator. You got a couple of functions left over, right? So I mean, it's we're not doing we're not having to break out the calculus. So for us, that's why it makes it pretty easy to drive. Once you get to if you've got a process that you can get, as Esteban was saying, to outcome to true quantitative outcome based, it just that discussion becomes very simple. You really have to think about organizational complexity, and in our business, actually, our company is really sort of transatlantic. So we've probably got our footprint is at rounding sort of like 40% North America and Western Europe. And so for us, I mean, we got enough complexity just trying to map between our office in Madrid and our office in Scottsdale, Arizona, especially when Arizona doesn't change times at daylight savings time, but that's a whole nother discussion. So then trying to add in sort of Chennai or Pune on top of that is, you're right, somebody's getting up, somebody's having a late night or a very early morning. And so that's absolutely, when we think about where we're putting things, and when we think about that, we absolutely think about the human piece of that, because at the end of the day, people will leave. You will get turnover. People will walk out the door if their life is miserable. And there's some things we can't help around making their lives miserable. We don't want to consciously make their life miserable.
One last question. Can we fit in? Yeah.
If this is on here. Yeah, from a contractual perspective, can you talk a little bit about how you address intellectual property issues and whether those are actually addressing the main concerns of US-based customers?
I'll start. Free trade makes that almost a non-issue, right? A NAFTA contract is enforceable in any US court. So whatever protection you would have in a contract you sign in the US, you have with a contract you sign with a Mexican company. My understanding of the free trade agreement with Colombia is that it'll give you the same thing. I know for a fact that in Chile and Costa Rica, you also have those very similar protections. So one of the things, if you're a company that's particularly concerned about IP and some of the other destinations' laws aren't particularly favorable, the free trade agreements definitely can ease some of your concerns because they basically make the law of this land the law of the contract.
I think just as now with my CIO hat on, I think always what you end up doing is really what we do is very ruthlessly look at where we've truly got competitive advantage and true differentiating IP, and usually you end up overestimating what IP is truly strategic and differentiating. And quite honestly, what we will do is we keep that core IP. We only keep it in captives, be they onshore, nearshore. And it's only non-strategic IP that we push out to third parties. But that's more of a strategic business decision, and you do the same thing onshore as you would offshore.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mark and Esteban, for sharing your insights.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.